My daughter whispered, "Dad, please don't let him kill me." 30 minutes later, everything changed. "Dad," her voice barely reached me, "please, don't let him kill me." Then came a loud crash. Glass shattered. A man screamed something I couldn't understand. The line went silent. For one terrifying second, I stared at my phone, hoping I had imagined it. I hadn't. Years of military service had taught me that fear has a sound, not panic, not shouting. Silence. The kind of silence that follows when someone realizes they might not survive the next few minutes. I didn't waste time asking questions. I grabbed my truck keys and headed for the door. As I drove through the cold rain, I called 911. "My daughter is in danger," I said calmly. "Possible domestic assault. I'm on my way." The dispatcher told me to wait for the deputies. I already knew I wouldn't. Some promises are older than the law, and a father doesn't wait while his child begs for her life. 3 months earlier, nobody in our family would have believed things would end the way they did, especially Ryan. Ryan Foster was the kind of man who could charm an entire room in less than 5 minutes. 40 years old, perfect smile, tailored suits, luxury SUV, regional sales manager for an upscale auto dealership outside Charleston. People admired him. Neighbors respected him. Strangers trusted him. Only later would everyone discover how carefully monsters learn to wear masks. My daughter Hannah believed she had found the perfect husband. I wanted to believe it too. After losing my wife, Margaret, to cancer 13 years ago, Hannah became my entire world. Watching her smile again after years of grief felt like a blessing I didn't deserve. So when Ryan proposed, I convinced myself the little things didn't matter. His arrogance, his constant need to be right, the way conversations somehow always became about him, the jokes that left Hannah laughing, even when her eyes didn't. I ignored them. Sometimes love makes fathers blind. My name is Thomas Mercer. I'm 69 years old, a retired widower living in a quiet fishing town along the South Carolina coast. Most people know me as the quiet man who fixes lawnmowers for neighbors, the man who always buys tomatoes from the same farmer's market every Saturday, the old guy who drinks black coffee at the diner before sunrise. To them, I'm just another retired veteran trying to enjoy peaceful days. That's exactly how I wanted it, because the version of me I buried decades ago wasn't someone I ever wanted to meet again. I spent 27 years serving this country. The missions remain classified. The medals stay locked away. And the names of good men who never came home. Those stay with me every single day. War teaches you many things. How to survive, how to stay calm, how to disappear. But it never teaches you how to stop worrying about your children. The first crack appeared nearly 2 years before that phone call. It was Thanksgiving. Margaret used to love cooking. She had passed every family recipe to Hannah before she died. That afternoon, Hannah proudly served dinner exactly the way her mother had taught her. The turkey came out just a little dry. Nothing serious. Everyone smiled and kept eating, everyone except Ryan. He carved a slice, looked around the table, and laughed. "Well, good thing you're beautiful," he smirked. "Because nobody's hiring you as a chef." Several relatives forced awkward laughs. Hannah laughed too, but I wasn't watching Ryan. I was watching her. For less than a second, her shoulders tightened. Her breathing changed. It happened before anyone else reacted. Tiny movements. Most people never notice them. I do. Years of training teach you that people reveal the truth long before they speak it. That single reaction stayed with me. After that day, I started paying closer attention. Christmas dinner. Ryan criticized the sweater Hannah wore because it looked cheap. A family barbecue. He corrected every story she told. If she laughed too loudly, he rolled his eyes. If she interrupted, he embarrassed her in front of everyone. Always smiling, always pretending it was just a joke. The insults became so common that everyone else stopped noticing, but I noticed something far more dangerous. Hannah had stopped defending herself. She apologized for things that weren't her fault. She asked permission before answering simple questions. Even when Ryan wasn't speaking, she watched his face before she spoke. Fear had quietly moved into their marriage. Nobody else could see it, but I could. I simply didn't know how deep it had already grown. And before long, I would discover that what everyone believed was a happy marriage was actually a prison hiding behind a beautiful front door. But the bruise I noticed a few weeks later, and the secret code Hannah sent me one rainy night, would prove my worst fears were only the beginning. Some wounds leave scars, others leave silence, and silence can be far more dangerous. For weeks after Thanksgiving, I kept telling myself I was imagining things. Maybe Ryan was simply immature. Maybe Hannah was adjusting to married life. Maybe every couple had rough seasons. Those were comforting lies. The truth was waiting patiently. It arrived one warm July evening. I invited Hannah and Ryan over for a backyard barbecue. Nothing expensive. Hamburgers, grilled corn, potato salad from the local grocery store. A few neighbors stopped by, bringing homemade desserts and plenty of laughter. For a little while, everything looked normal. Ryan laughed louder than everyone else. He shook hands, told stories, made people laugh. If you had met him that evening, you would have thought he was the perfect son-in-law. But masks always slip, even if only for a second. I was standing at the grill flipping burgers when Ryan walked over, holding a bottle of beer. "You know, Tom," he said with a grin, "you're probably the quietest military guy I've ever met." I smiled politely. I've had enough talking for one lifetime. Several neighbors chuckled. Ryan didn't stop. "So what exactly did you do?" He leaned against the fence. "Office work?" More laughter. I simply shrugged. "Something like that." He laughed harder. "See? That's what I mean." He pointed his beer toward me. "Hannah acts like you're some kind of legendary war hero." Behind him, I noticed Hannah stiffen immediately. "Ryan," she forced a smile. "Please." "What?" he laughed. "I'm just kidding." Then he looked back at me. "You know, I think most military stories get bigger every time they're told." The backyard became strangely quiet. Everyone waited for my reaction. I had none. I turned another burger, checked the temperature, added more charcoal. Nothing else. People like Ryan feed on attention. When they don't get it, they become restless. A few minutes later, Hannah came inside with me to carry plates into the kitchen. The moment the door closed behind us, her smile disappeared. "I'm sorry," she whispered. I looked at her carefully. "Sorry for what?" She avoided my eyes. "For him." I shook my head. "You don't apologize for someone else's choices." As she reached for a serving bowl, her sleeve slid upward. A dark bruise circled her wrist, fresh, almost hidden beneath makeup. My stomach tightened. "What happened?" She immediately pulled her sleeve back down. "Oh," she laughed nervously. I bumped into a shelf. "Hannah." "I'm okay." She still wouldn't look at me. "Dad." Her voice had changed. It wasn't frustration. It wasn't embarrassment. It was fear. Real fear. The kind people try desperately to hide. I wanted to ask more. Instead, I simply nodded. Because frightened people don't open locked doors when they're being pushed. They open them when they finally feel safe. That night, after everyone left, rain began falling across the coast. Soft, steady, peaceful. I sat alone in my garage workshop, while my Labrador, Cooper, slept beside my chair. The rain reminded me of nights overseas, long nights filled with waiting. Waiting often feels worse than danger. I opened an old cedar chest that hadn't been touched in years. Inside rested pieces of another lifetime, photographs, service medals, challenge coins, a folded American flag, and one small laminated card. I picked it up slowly. Years ago, when Hannah was 16, I'd taught her something most fathers never teach their children. Emergency communication codes. Nothing complicated, nothing dramatic. Simple phrases someone could use if they were being watched. We practiced them like a game. She used to laugh every time we rehearsed. "Dad," she'd say, "you've watched way too many spy movies?" Maybe, or maybe I simply understood that danger rarely announces itself. Before putting the card away, I remembered the most important rule. If she ever used the real emergency phrase, I would come. Immediately. No questions, no hesitation, no matter the cost. It was nearly midnight when my phone vibrated on the workbench. A text from Hannah. "Dad, can you send me Mom's peach cobbler recipe tomorrow?" Perfectly normal. Almost. Then I read the final line. Recipe 417. Every drop of warmth left my body. Recipe 417 wasn't a recipe. It was the distress code, the one we created over 20 years earlier, the code that meant only one thing. I'm in immediate danger for exactly 2 seconds. I stared at the screen. Then 27 years of training quietly came back to life. My breathing slowed. My hands became steady. Every unnecessary thought disappeared. I stood, walked to the hallway closet, picked up my truck keys, opened the small gun safe. I secured my licensed handgun inside a locked vehicle case. Not because I wanted revenge, not because I planned to fight, because a father prepares for the worst. While praying, he never has to use it. As thunder rolled across the night sky, I looked once more at Hannah's message. One sentence echoed inside my mind. Please don't be too late. I locked the front door behind me, started the truck, and drove straight into the storm. Completely unaware that before this night was over, someone's life would change forever. Thomas races through the storm while speaking with 911, but when he arrives at Hannah's house, what he sees through the kitchen window makes every nightmare become terrifyingly real. The storm grew heavier as I drove. Rain hammered against my windshield so hard that the road ahead disappeared every few seconds. The wipers struggled to keep up. Lightning flashed across the sky, illuminating empty streets for only a heartbeat before darkness swallowed everything again. Inside the truck, I felt completely calm. People often misunderstand that kind of calm. They think it means you're fearless. It doesn't. It means you've accepted that panic won't save anyone. My phone remained on speaker as the 911 dispatcher stayed on the line. "Sir," she said carefully, "can you tell me exactly what's happening?" "My daughter sent an emergency distress code." "Has she told you she's been assaulted?" "No, but she doesn't need to." There was a brief silence. "Are you familiar with domestic violence situations?" "I've spent my life recognizing danger." She hesitated before asking her next question. "Are you approaching the residence now?" "Yes." "Our deputies are less than 5 minutes away." "I understand. I need you to wait for them." I looked through the rain toward the neighborhood only a few blocks ahead. "I can't." "Sir." "My daughter asked me for help." Another pause, then her voice became softer. "Are you carrying a firearm?" "Yes." "Do you intend to use it?" "Only if there's absolutely no other choice." That answer seemed to reassure her. "Please be careful." "I always am." I ended the call. The rest, I had to handle myself. Hannah's neighborhood sat on the edge of town. Large homes, quiet streets, perfect lawns, the kind of place where everyone waved at each other, and nobody believed terrible things could happen behind closed doors. I parked half a block away. The rain had eased into a cold drizzle. Every downstairs light inside the house was on. Then I heard it. A man yelling. Even from outside, I could hear the rage in his voice. My heart sank. I crossed the street without making a sound. Years had slowed my body. My knees weren't as strong. My shoulders reminded me every morning that I wasn't 30 anymore. But experience had replaced speed. Every step was deliberate, every movement controlled. As I reached the front window, I looked inside. Everything stopped. Hannah stood trapped against the kitchen counter. One side of her face was swollen. Blood trickled from the corner of her mouth. Broken glass covered the floor around her feet. Ryan stood inches away from her, his face burned with alcohol and fury. He grabbed her wrist so violently that she stumbled sideways. "You think you can ignore me?" he shouted. "You think you're better than me?" Hannah was crying. "Ryan, please." "Don't." I said, "Don't." He slammed a drinking glass against the wall. It exploded into hundreds of pieces. She flinched instinctively, not because she was surprised, because she'd experienced it before. That realization hit me harder than anything else. This wasn't the first time. It wasn't even close. I moved quietly along the side of the house toward the backyard. The sliding patio door wasn't completely shut. Rain drifted through the narrow opening, making the hardwood floor shine under the kitchen lights. Ryan never noticed. He was too consumed by his own anger. "You always run to your father," he screamed. "You think that old man can save you?" Hannah shook her head desperately. "I never called him." "Liar!" He shoved her hard enough that her shoulder struck the countertop. She cried out. That was enough. I stepped inside, silently. No dramatic entrance, no shouting, no threats, just steady footsteps across the wet hardwood floor. Hannah looked up first. Her eyes widened instantly. "Dad!" Ryan turned around slowly. For one brief moment, he actually smiled. "Well, look who's here!" He laughed drunkenly. "The old soldier." I continued walking until only a few feet separated us. My voice remained calm. "Step away from my daughter." Ryan chuckled. "Or what?" I didn't answer. I simply repeated myself. "Step away." He spread his arms with exaggerated confidence. "Oh, come on. What are you going to do?" "You think I'm afraid of some retired old man who fixes lawnmowers?" He took one slow step toward me, then another. "You've been acting tough ever since I met you." He pointed a finger inches from my face. "But here's the truth. You're nothing. You hear me? Nothing." Behind him, Hannah whispered through tears, "Dad, please, just leave." She wasn't afraid for herself anymore. She was afraid for me. Ryan laughed when he heard her. "You see? Even she knows you can't stop me." He raised his arm, not to point, not to threaten, to strike. The movement was sloppy, slow, fueled by alcohol instead of control. But one thing never changes. Violence always begins before the fist lands. You see it in the shoulders, the hips, the eyes. And after 27 years, I recognized it instantly. Before Ryan even realized what was happening, I moved. A single movement changes everything. Ryan never lands the punch, and within seconds, police officers walk into a scene none of them will ever forget. Ryan's fist never reached me. The instant his shoulder shifted forward, my body reacted, not out of anger, out of instinct. Years of training don't disappear with age. They simply become quieter, faster, more precise. I stepped slightly to the side. My left hand redirected his wrist. My right hand controlled his elbow. His own momentum did the rest. Before he understood what had happened, his feet left their balance. A split second later, thud! Ryan hit the hardwood floor chest first. The impact knocked the air from his lungs. "What?" He barely managed to speak before I secured his arm behind his back, not enough to injure him, just enough to stop him from hurting anyone else. He struggled violently. "What the hell?" I adjusted my grip, a small amount of pressure. Nothing excessive, just controlled restraint. He immediately froze. Pain has a language, and I knew exactly how much was necessary. No more, no less. Behind us, Hannah stood frozen. Her hands covered her mouth. She wasn't crying anymore. She looked shocked, as if she couldn't believe someone had finally stopped him. Ryan twisted again. "Get off me!" "You crazy old man!" His voice echoed through the kitchen. I remained perfectly calm. "Stop resisting," he cursed louder. "You attacked me." "No, you attacked my daughter." He tried another desperate movement. Again, it failed. Every attempt only made him more exhausted. I had spent years learning how to control stronger men without breaking them. Ryan had spent years believing no one would ever challenge him. Tonight, reality was finally catching up with him. Hannah slowly backed away from the broken glass. She stared at me as if seeing someone she had never truly known. "Dad?" Her voice trembled. "I'm sorry." I looked toward her. "You have nothing to apologize for." Fresh tears rolled down her face. "I should have told you." "You did." She looked confused. "I sent the message." I nodded. "And I came." For the first time that night, a tiny piece of fear left her eyes. Ryan suddenly started laughing. It wasn't confidence anymore. It was desperation. "You think you've won?" He spat toward the floor. "When the police get here, they're going to arrest you. You broke into my house. You assaulted me." He smiled through gritted teeth. "I'll sue you. I'll take everything you own." I looked at him without emotion. "If that's what you believe," he kept talking, "they'll believe me. I'm respected in this town. I have money. I have lawyers. You?" He laughed bitterly. "You're just some old veteran." I didn't answer. Men like Ryan couldn't stand silence. Without an audience? Their confidence slowly collapsed. Less than a minute later. Red and blue lights flashed through the rain outside. The sound of sirens filled the neighborhood. 2 sheriff's deputies rushed through the front door. "Sheriff's office." "Don't move!" Both officers entered with their weapons drawn. I immediately released one hand. raised it slowly, and remained exactly where I was. "The victim is safe," I said calmly. "The suspect is restrained." Everything became quiet. One deputy moved toward Hannah, the other studied me carefully. His eyes traveled from my posture to Ryan, then back to me. He noticed something most people wouldn't: my breathing, my balance, the controlled position of Ryan's arm, the complete absence of panic. Recognition slowly appeared on his face, not because he knew me, because he'd seen military professionals before. "Sir," he said respectfully, "can you stand up slowly?" "I can." I released Ryan completely, stepped backward, and raised both hands where everyone could see them. The moment the pressure disappeared, Ryan rolled across the floor dramatically. He pointed at me. "He attacked me!" "Arrest him! He's dangerous!" The younger deputy barely looked at him. Instead, he walked straight toward Hannah. "Ma'am, are you injured?" For several seconds, she couldn't answer. Then she nodded. "Yes." Just one word. That single word changed everything. The younger deputy immediately handcuffed Ryan. "You have the right to remain silent." Ryan's face turned pale. "What? No! You're arresting the wrong person. This old man broke into my house." "I didn't do anything." His voice grew louder with every second. The deputies ignored him. One officer photographed the broken glass, the overturned chair, the blood on Hannah's lip, the bruises on her wrist. Evidence speaks louder than excuses. Ryan finally realized nobody believed him. His confidence disappeared almost instantly. Paramedics arrived moments later. While they checked Hannah's injuries, I quietly picked up a blanket from the living room couch. I wrapped it around her shoulders, just like I had done years ago whenever thunderstorms frightened her as a little girl. The moment the blanket touched her, she completely broke down. Years of fear, years of pretending, years of surviving, all poured out in uncontrollable sobs. She buried her face against my chest. "I was so scared." "I know. I thought he'd kill me someday." My heart felt heavier than it ever had on any battlefield, because no father should ever hear those words from his child. I gently rested my hand on the back of her head. "You're safe now." She held onto me tighter, as if letting go meant the nightmare might return. A few minutes later, the older deputy walked over. His voice was quiet, respectful. "Were you in the military, sir?" "I was." "What branch?" "The Navy." He looked thoughtfully at the way Ryan had been restrained. Then he smiled faintly. "I had a feeling." "I've seen that kind of control before." I nodded once. "I did what I had to do?" He extended his hand. "And because you stayed in control, you probably saved your daughter's case." At that moment, I finally understood something. Winning isn't about hurting the person who caused the pain. Sometimes the greatest victory is refusing to become like them. But once Hannah finally feels safe enough to tell the truth, she reveals a secret she's hidden for years, including recordings that could destroy Ryan's entire life, and one heartbreaking confession that leaves Thomas blaming himself. The house felt different after Ryan was taken away. Not peaceful, just quiet. The kind of quiet that settles in after a storm destroys everything in its path. Broken glass had been swept away. The flashing police lights were gone. Neighbors had returned to their homes. But the memories? Those remained. Hannah came home with me that night. I never asked where she wanted to go. I already knew. Some places stop feeling like home long before people leave them. She slept upstairs in her old bedroom. The room hadn't changed much over the years. The same white curtains, the same bookshelf, the same handmade quilt Margaret had sewn during one long winter before she passed away. I had never found the strength to change it. Maybe because some part of me always hoped Hannah would come back. I just never imagined it would happen like this. The next morning, I woke before sunrise. Old habits. The coffee was already brewing when Hannah quietly walked into the kitchen. She wore one of my old Navy sweatshirts. It hung loosely around her shoulders. The bruise on her face looked darker in the morning light. Seeing it made something twist inside my chest. She poured herself a cup of coffee. Then she whispered without looking at me, "I'm sorry." I looked up. "For what?" "For bringing all of this into your life." I stared at her for several seconds. Then I slowly shook my head. No. You survived. Never apologize for surviving. The words seemed to catch her off guard. Tears immediately filled her eyes. I should have left him. Maybe. Her shoulders dropped. But fear convinces good people to stay in terrible places. She wiped her face with her sleeve. I thought if I tried harder, if I stopped arguing, if I became a better wife, he'd change. I sighed quietly. No. People like Ryan don't become cruel because someone failed them. They become cruel because they believe they have the right to control others. For several moments, neither of us spoke. Then she whispered something that nearly broke me. I didn't want you to think I failed. Those words hit harder than any punch ever could. I looked down at my coffee, because deep inside, I knew I had failed too, not by loving her too little, but by seeing too little. After Margaret died, I changed, not overnight. Slowly, I buried myself in routine, repairing engines, fishing alone, mowing lawns, anything that kept my hands busy. Busy hands don't have time to grieve. At least that's what I told myself. Meanwhile, my daughter was grieving too, but instead of helping each other, we suffered separately. Looking back now, I realized something painful. Sometimes children don't stop asking for help. They simply stop believing anyone can hear them. 3 days later, the rain finally stopped. Hannah and I sat together on the back porch overlooking the marsh behind my house. Cooper chased birds across the wet grass while we drank hot tea in complete silence. Finally, she began talking, not because I questioned her, because she was finally ready. He wasn't always like this. I nodded. They never are. She gave a weak smile. When we first met, he made me feel important. He opened every door. He remembered every birthday. He called me beautiful every single day. I stayed quiet. Then her smile disappeared. After the wedding, little things changed. What kind of things? He didn't like my friends, so I stopped seeing them. He criticized my clothes, so I bought different ones. He hated when I visited you too often, so I came less. Every sentence sounded smaller than the one before it, as if each memory stole another piece of her confidence. It happened so slowly, I didn't even realize I was disappearing. I closed my eyes briefly. Control rarely begins with violence. It begins with isolation, one sacrifice at a time. The first time he pushed me. She stopped speaking, took a shaky breath, then continued. He cried afterward. He promised it would never happen again. He bought flowers. He said stress had changed him. I looked toward the lake beyond the trees. I had heard stories like this before, too many. Abuse follows patterns, cruelty, apology, temporary kindness, then even greater cruelty. The cycle repeats until someone breaks it. Hannah reached into her purse. I need to show you something. She placed a small flash drive on the table. I started recording him almost 8 months ago. I looked at her. You did? She nodded. I thought nobody would believe me. The following afternoon, Detective Melissa Grant came to my house. She was direct, professional, and she listened more than she spoke. When Hannah handed her the flash drive, the detective plugged it into her laptop. The first recording lasted less than a minute. Ryan's voice filled the room, screaming, objects breaking, Hannah crying. Then came one sentence that made every muscle in my body tighten. If your father ever gets involved, I'll make sure he regrets it for the rest of his life. The recording ended. Silence filled the kitchen. Detective Grant slowly closed the laptop. This, she said quietly, changes everything. Hannah lowered her eyes. I felt guilty recording him. The detective immediately shook her head. No, you documented the truth. There's a difference. For the first time since that terrible night, I watched a tiny weight lift from my daughter's shoulders. Someone finally believed her, not because of sympathy, because of evidence. That evening, after Hannah went upstairs, I sat alone in my garage. The old cedar chest remained open. My medals rested exactly where I'd left them. For years, I'd believed my greatest battles were behind me. I was wrong. The hardest battle wasn't overseas. It was realizing my daughter had been fighting alone, while I was only a few miles away. And that truth was far more painful than any memory war had ever given me. But Ryan refuses to accept responsibility. At his first court hearing, he accuses Thomas of being the real criminal, and what happens inside that courtroom leaves everyone stunned. 6 weeks passed before the first court hearing. Healing didn't happen in those 6 weeks. Not really. Some mornings, Hannah smiled while helping me make breakfast. Other mornings, she barely spoke. A slammed car door made her flinch. Someone raising their voice on television made her leave the room. Trauma doesn't disappear because the danger is over. Sometimes, it keeps living inside the person long after the nightmare ends. I learned not to rush her. Healing isn't measured in days. It's measured in moments. The courthouse stood in the center of town, an old brick building that had seen generations of trials. That morning, the sky was gray, and a cold wind swept through the parking lot. Hannah walked beside me, holding a cup of coffee with both hands, not because she was thirsty, because it kept her hands from shaking. "You don't have to go inside," I told her softly. She looked at the courthouse for several seconds. "I do," her voice was quiet, "but I don't want to spend the rest of my life running from him." I gave a small nod. For the first time, I wasn't walking beside a frightened daughter. I was walking beside a woman who had decided to fight for her future. Ryan was already seated when we entered the courtroom. For a brief moment, I barely recognized him. The expensive suits were gone. Instead, he wore a plain dark jacket provided by his attorney. His neatly styled hair looked messy. Dark circles rested beneath his eyes. Weeks in county jail had stripped away the polished image he worked so hard to maintain. But one thing hadn't changed: the bitterness. The moment he saw Hannah sitting beside me, his jaw tightened, his eyes burned with resentment. He still believed this was everyone else's fault, never his own. The hearing began. Ryan's attorney stood first. He spoke confidently. "My client has made mistakes, but he is not the violent monster being portrayed." He paced slowly before the judge. "This incident escalated because Mr. Thomas Mercer unlawfully entered the residence and used unnecessary force." Several people glanced toward me. I remained completely still. Years earlier, someone had taught me an important lesson. The calmest person in the room is usually the one people trust. The prosecutor stood next. Unlike the defense attorney, she didn't rely on dramatic speeches. She relied on facts. Photographs of Hannah's injuries, medical reports, 911 records, deputy statements, crime scene photographs. Each piece quietly dismantled the story Ryan wanted everyone to believe. Then she introduced something even more powerful: the body camera footage. The courtroom lights dimmed slightly as the video played. Everyone watched in silence. The deputies entered the kitchen. Ryan was pinned safely to the floor. I wasn't yelling. I wasn't striking him. I wasn't threatening him. I was simply preventing him from hurting Hannah. The footage showed everything: his shouting, my calm voice, Hannah crying beside the kitchen counter with blood on her lip. When the video ended, no one spoke. There was nothing left to argue about. Truth rarely needs dramatic music. It speaks for itself. But Ryan wasn't finished. Against his attorney's advice, he insisted on speaking. He stood and adjusted his jacket, then pointed directly toward me. This old man manipulated everything. He turned Hannah against me. He filled her head with lies. He wanted to destroy our marriage from the beginning. His voice grew louder with every sentence. He brainwashed her. The courtroom remained silent. Then something unexpected happened. Hannah slowly stood. Her hands trembled. So did her voice. At first, no. Every head turned toward her. "My father never told me to leave my husband." She swallowed hard. "He never tried to control my decisions." She looked directly at Ryan. "You did." The room became perfectly still. She took one long breath, then continued. "You isolated me. You embarrassed me. You made me believe I was worthless." Tears filled her eyes. "But the worst thing you took—" She paused. "Was my ability to recognize myself?" The words echoed through the courtroom. Even the judge lowered her eyes for a moment. Hannah wasn't speaking with anger anymore. She was speaking with honesty. "And the night my father came," she looked toward me, "he didn't destroy my family." Her voice became stronger. "He saved my life." Silence. Absolute silence. Several people sitting in the gallery quietly wiped tears from their faces. Even Ryan's attorney looked down at his notes. There was nothing left to say. During a short recess, I stepped into the hallway. The prosecutor joined me near the courthouse windows. "You handled yourself remarkably well that night," she said. "I only did what any father would." She smiled gently. "I don't think that's true." I looked at her. "If you had lost your temper," she folded her arms, "if you had beaten Ryan out of anger, the defense would have spent this entire trial talking about you?" I understood immediately. Instead, every conversation centered on Hannah, on the abuse, on the evidence, exactly where it belonged. She nodded. "Control protected your daughter far more than revenge ever could." Those words stayed with me, because they were true. Real strength isn't proving you can destroy someone. It's refusing to lose yourself while protecting the people you love. As we left the courthouse that afternoon, reporters gathered near the entrance. Camera flashes lit up the sidewalk. Microphones stretched toward us. "Mr. Mercer, do you have a statement? Were you afraid that night?" I stopped walking, looked at the cameras, then answered with complete honesty. "Every father is afraid when his child calls for help." I took Hannah's hand, and I hope no parent ever ignores that call. Without saying another word, we walked away together. Behind us, Ryan watched through the courtroom window. For the first time since I'd known him, he didn't look angry. He looked scared, because deep down, he finally understood something. His greatest enemy had never been me. It had always been the truth. But the trial isn't over yet. At the final sentencing hearing, Thomas opens a garment bag he hasn't touched in 13 years, and when he walks into the courtroom wearing his old Navy dress uniform, even Ryan is left speechless. The final sentencing hearing arrived on a cold December morning. The town had already decorated its streets for Christmas. Store windows glowed with lights. Children laughed outside coffee shops. Families hurried across sidewalks carrying wrapped presents. Life moved forward. It always does, even when yours feels like it stopped. Before sunrise, I climbed the narrow attic stairs carrying a small flashlight. Dust floated through the cold air. Everything was exactly where I had left it years ago. Old fishing gear, boxes filled with family photographs, Margaret's Christmas decorations, and in the far corner, a long black garment bag. I stood there quietly for several seconds. The last time I had opened it was the day we buried my wife. After her funeral, I promised myself I would never wear my Navy dress uniform again. That chapter of my life was over, or so I believed. Slowly, I unzipped the bag. The crisp white uniform looked exactly as I remembered, perfectly pressed, carefully preserved. Waiting. I ran my hand across the fabric. Memories flooded back instantly. Young faces, long deployments, friends whose voices I could still hear, brothers who never came home. People often admire medals. Veterans usually remember the names attached to them. I carefully pinned each medal onto the jacket, not because I wanted recognition, because today wasn't about me. It was about reminding myself of something I had almost forgotten. Honor isn't something you wear, it's something you live. When I walked downstairs, Hannah was waiting near the front door. She froze. For several moments, she couldn't speak. "I've never seen you wear it." Her voice was barely above a whisper. I smiled gently. "Neither has most of the town." She looked at the medals across my chest. "You look—" She searched for the right word. "Different." I chuckled softly. "No. I've always been this man. I just stopped showing people." She stepped closer and carefully adjusted my collar, just like Margaret used to. For a moment, it felt as though part of my wife was standing beside us again. I wish Mom could see this. I swallowed the lump in my throat. So do I. The courthouse became unusually quiet the moment we walked inside. Conversations stopped. People turned. Some recognized the uniform immediately. Others simply sensed the weight it carried. It wasn't about rank or medals. It was about a lifetime of service that most people would never fully understand. Even the deputies standing near the entrance straightened slightly as we passed. One of them nodded respectfully. "Good morning, sir." I returned the nod. "Morning." Nothing more needed to be said. Ryan was already seated beside his attorney. The moment he looked up, his expression changed completely. For the first time since I'd known him, he looked genuinely stunned, not because I appeared intimidating, because he suddenly realized something that should have been obvious years earlier. The quiet old man he mocked at family barbecues, the man he called weak, The man he believed had lived an ordinary life, had spent decades carrying responsibilities Ryan couldn't even imagine. His confidence disappeared before the hearing even began. He lowered his eyes, said nothing. The judge entered. Everyone stood. After reviewing the evidence once more, she looked toward me. "Mr. Mercer, would you like to make a victim impact statement before sentencing?" I slowly stood. Every joint reminded me that I was almost 70, but my voice remained steady. I've spent most of my adult life around violence. The courtroom became silent. I've seen wars. I've buried friends. I've watched families receive news that changed their lives forever. I paused, and after all those years, I learned something. I turned toward Ryan. He never looked up. Strength has nothing to do with making people fear you. Several people quietly nodded. Anyone can raise a fist. Anyone can scream. Anyone can try to control someone weaker. That isn't strength. I looked toward Hannah. She smiled through tears. Real strength is protecting people who cannot protect themselves. Without losing your own humanity. The room remained completely still. Then I said something nobody expected. I don't hate Ryan. For the first time, Ryan slowly raised his head. Confusion filled his face. I hate the choices he made. I hate the pain he caused. But hatred has already damaged enough lives. I looked back toward the judge. I'm not asking this court for revenge. I'm asking for accountability so that no one else has to live through what my daughter endured. The judge thanked me quietly. I returned to my seat. Hannah reached over and gently squeezed my hand. Neither of us spoke. We didn't need to. After a short recess, the courtroom filled once more. Everyone knew the sentence was only minutes away. Ryan sat motionless. His attorney whispered something to him. He barely responded. The arrogance that had once defined him had completely vanished. The judge adjusted the papers before her. She looked across the courtroom, then began reading her decision. Every word felt heavier than the last. Ryan listened without interruption. For the first time in years, he couldn't talk his way out of the consequences. And before the hearing was over, he would hear a sentence that would change the rest of his life forever. The judge delivers Ryan's fate. Months later, an unexpected letter arrives from prison, but what it says leaves Thomas and Hannah questioning whether a man who destroyed his own family can ever truly change. The courtroom was so quiet. You could hear the pages turning as the judge picked up the final document. Ryan stood before the bench with his shoulders slumped. The confidence that had once filled every room he entered was gone. No expensive suit, no charming smile, no clever excuses. Just a man finally facing the consequences of his own choices. The judge looked directly at him. "Mr. Foster, this court has reviewed the evidence, the testimony, the medical reports, the recordings, and the statements presented during these proceedings." She paused. "What happened inside your home was not an isolated incident. It was a repeated pattern of emotional and physical abuse." Ryan lowered his head. The victim spent years living in fear. And that fear nearly cost her life. The courtroom remained completely silent. "Therefore," the judge continued, "this court sentences you to 4 years in state prison. You will also complete mandatory alcohol treatment, domestic violence rehabilitation, and anger management counseling. A permanent protective order will remain in effect after your release." The gavel struck. "This hearing is concluded." For a few seconds, no one moved. 2 deputies stepped toward Ryan. As they secured the handcuffs around his wrists, he finally looked toward Hannah. His eyes filled with tears. Real tears, not the kind he used to manipulate people. These looked different. His voice cracked. "I'm sorry." Hannah looked at him quietly. There was no anger on her face, no satisfaction, no hatred, only peace. She didn't answer. Some apologies arrived years too late. The deputies led Ryan toward the courtroom doors. Just before disappearing, he looked back one last time. Then he was gone. And with him. The chapter that had haunted our family for years finally came to an end. Winter slowly gave way to spring. Healing didn't happen overnight. Some mornings Hannah still woke from nightmares. Sometimes loud voices in grocery stores made her anxious. Sometimes she sat silently staring out the kitchen window for reasons she couldn't explain. Trauma doesn't disappear. It slowly loses its grip. One ordinary day at a time. Eventually, Hannah rented a small apartment above a flower shop downtown. It wasn't large, but every room filled with sunlight. She smiled more often there. The silence no longer frightened her. It comforted her. She also returned to work at the local library. At first, she worried people would whisper about the trial. Instead, something unexpected happened. Older women often stopped to hug her. Several quietly admitted they had survived similar marriages decades earlier. One afternoon, she told me something while we shared coffee. "I thought everyone would judge me for staying." I stirred my coffee before answering. "Most people who've lived long enough have survived something they rarely talk about. They're usually kinder than we expect." She smiled. A real smile, not the nervous one she'd worn for years. Life changed for me, too. For a long time after retiring, I believed solitude was peace. Fishing alone, fixing engines, eating breakfast by myself every Thursday. I convinced myself I was content. The truth was, I had simply become comfortable being alone. After everything happened with Hannah, I started reconnecting with old friends. A retired Marine named Frank invited me to breakfast every Wednesday with a group of veterans. At first, I refused. Eventually, I went. We didn't spend much time talking about war. Instead, we talked about grandchildren, fishing, bad knees, old trucks that refused to start. Growing older teaches you something important. The greatest victories aren't remembered on battlefields. They're remembered around dinner tables. One Sunday afternoon, Hannah brought my grandson, Ethan, over to spend the day. He was 11 years old, curious, full of questions. We spent the afternoon fishing beside the lake near my house. He caught absolutely nothing for almost an hour. He didn't seem to mind. Finally, he looked at me. "Mom says you were in the Navy." "I was." "Were you a hero?" I smiled. I knew a lot of heroes. He frowned. "But what about you?" I looked across the calm water before answering. Heroes aren't people who enjoy fighting. They're people who protect others when they have no choice. He thought about that quietly. Then he asked the question I'd been expecting. Why was my dad so mean? Children deserve honest answers, just not heavy ones. I handed him the fishing rod. Sometimes people confuse love with control. They think making someone afraid gives them power. It doesn't. He nodded slowly, then asked one more question. "So what's real strength?" At that exact moment, his fishing line jerked. He excitedly pulled up the smallest fish either of us had ever seen. I laughed. "So?" He grinned proudly. "What is it?" I placed a hand on his shoulder. "Real strength is making people feel safe when they're with you." He smiled. "I want to be that kind of man." "I know you will." Early that summer, Hannah arrived at my house carrying a plain white envelope. There wasn't any return address. The prison stamp told me everything. Ryan. She sat across from me while I carefully opened it. Inside was a handwritten letter. The handwriting looked shaky, nothing like the confident man we once knew. I read every word. There were no excuses, no blaming alcohol, no blaming stress, no blaming anyone else. Instead, he admitted something he had never admitted before. I spent years trying to feel important by making everyone around me feel small. I read that sentence twice, then quietly folded the letter. Hannah looked at me. "Do you think he's changed?" I leaned back in my chair. "I think." "Real regret hurts." She nodded slowly. "Do you forgive him?" That question stayed between us for a long moment. "Finally," I answered honestly. "Forgiveness isn't something you feel once. It's something you choose again and again. Some days it's easier than others." She reached across the table and gently took my hand. "Thank you for coming that night." I smiled. "You saved yourself." She looked surprised. "You asked for help. That was the bravest thing you ever did." Tears filled her eyes, but these were different. They weren't tears of fear. They were tears of freedom. A few weeks later, our family gathered at my house for Sunday dinner. Fried chicken, mashed potatoes, fresh cornbread. The same simple meals Margaret used to make. The kitchen echoed with laughter. Ethan told terrible jokes. Hannah laughed until tears rolled down her cheeks. For the first time in years. Our home sounded alive again. As I looked around the table, I realized something that had taken nearly 70 years to understand. When I was young, I believed strength meant winning fights. The military taught me that strength meant surviving impossible situations, but growing older taught me the greatest lesson of all. Real strength is answering the phone when someone you love is terrified. It's staying calm when anger feels easier. It's protecting the people who depend on you, without allowing hatred to change who you are. And sometimes, the strongest thing a person can do is ask for help before it's too late. If you're listening to this story today, remember this. If someone you love suddenly grows quiet, if their smile begins to look forced, if they slowly disappear in front of your eyes, don't ignore it. Reach out. Ask again. Stay present. Because one conversation, one phone call, or one act of courage can save an entire family. And no matter how old you are, it is never too late to choose compassion over control, hope over fear, and love over silence.